All right. All right. All right. All right. Oh dear. Beer's too frozen to bloody pour. Okay. Um. All right. I don't know who's listening. Perhaps only a few. But I'm going to start this broadcast with pointing out. Oh, three people. Nice. Precisely the right number. So there's this essay I wrote just a little while ago, just after the uh, just after the. Oh wait, here we go. Share screen. Sorry, I'm very boomerish today. So Chrome tab. There we go, and share. All right. So I'm sharing with you this particular article that I called the Goldberg Variations, just because it's a famous performance of some of Bach's pieces by a pianist at the time called Goldberg. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So Whoopi Goldberg also happens to have a Jewish surname, so I thought it was a funny thing to point at, considering she recently got in trouble for basically treading on a big sort of taboo around Jewish identity, the Holocaust and so on. Because there's an official narrative that everyone sort of got to go with. And it's not that she sort of contradicted any of the sort of raw facts on the ground, but more that she deviated in the interpretation. So there's this interesting little picture I found, which is an excerpt from a pamphlet from the Black Panthers put out in 1968. It's part of sort of a broader manifesto, but they had this really sort of interesting diagram of the race relations as they saw it in America. And as you can see, obviously you've got the English up there, the Anglo-Saxons up there at the top, and the Irish and the Italians, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of the order of immigration and so on. But then it's interesting they put the Jews as being sort of flowing from top to bottom, like they can interact with any other ethnicity. And it's a very sort of interesting point. Where there's a sort of basic ambiguity about where Jews fall in uh, sort of ethnic hierarchy in the West. I mean, the mainstream term that would be used to describe that would be sort of privilege. So, how privileged are you? Well, Anglo-Saxons and Jews are the most privileged, and blacks and Jews are the least privileged. It's kind of and you sort of see this showing up as the essay goes on, because you know what you know what, fuck it, I'm just going to jump into reading it. Recently in America, Whoopi Goldberg, interesting how a black woman adopted a Jewish name to fit in with the Jewish dominated American entertainment industry, while working alongside American Jewish entertainers like Jon Stewart Leibovitz, who choose the precise opposite strategy. So she got in trouble with the Jewish activist community for disrespecting the sanctity of the Holocaust. Whoopi Goldberg, from all appearances, is a completely benign person, doesn't really emphatically wish to insist on any perspective that might divide or inflame anyone. In other words, this would seem to be a sort of insignificant peripheral bit of celebrity drama. But far from being a mere quirk, her perspective is a fairly common one amongst Black Westerners. In fact, it's an eminently ingrained academic position. This taxonomy of humanity, these ontological presumptions, are shared by people in my country with powerful and malicious intentions, and they bring up interesting assumptions about the structure of interethnic conflict in the West. So this seemingly trivial debate, in fact, reveals in very fine detail the faults and fineries of the collective survival strategies of both the Jewish and African diaspora in the West. And it shows us how adaptable and isomorphic these strategies are across ethnic groups, especially when applied to the strange little microcosmic world of South Africa. We all have tools of survival, but these are worn out quickly when the world changes. There's no rainbow utopia coming, and there never was. Coexistence, whether separated by borders or not, is struggle. It's also mandatory. As part one is the Black Nationalist Rhetorical strategy. On her long-running chat show, The View, Whoopi Goldberg was commenting on the removal of mouse. from some local school curriculum for its use of nudity and rude language. It's a graphic novel retelling the Holocaust, in which Nazis are portrayed as cats, Jews as mice, and Mitläufer as pigs. If you don't know, Mitläufer is just sort of the people who went along with the program, but didn't have any sort of particularly strong feelings one way or the other. So amid the conversation, initially missed by co-panelists, Goldberg remarked that it was white people doing it to white people. But having missed this remark, her subsequent remark that the Holocaust isn't about race, it's an example of man's inhumanity to man, that remark made the room silent in confusion at the broken shibboleth. The Holocaust to her was merely an example of white-on-white violence. As she elaborated in her appearance on Colbert's show, Jews and Gentiles are different ethnicities, not races, and that race is something you can see objectively and ethnicity is socially constructed. Well, of course, there are others who would likely agree. Like there's a Black Panther Party in Israel that started up in the 1970s because there are Jews that are darker than others. Yeah. And so what she's thus saying is that race is real and biological and that ethnicity is just learned behavior. And so yet she still buys into the idea that race is a colonial construct. So these seem to be contradictory premises, but they persist across the African diaspora. Same is true amongst Black nationalists an ocean away, like here in South Africa, as illustrated by the controversy around Professor Lwazi Lushaba. But as I have long said, if you perceive a contradiction in someone's worldview, it's only because you can't see the unifying principle they really operate on. Lushaba, typical of his intellectual tradition, which is Black consciousness, is an historically ignorant and narrow-minded man. His argument is that the Holocaust was the first time that white people had slaughtered or sought to eradicate one another, and that the horror the West felt after the Holocaust was entirely due to the fact that white people were victims. Hitler, he argued, did nothing exceptional in terms of the history of Europeans. He did nothing wrong in the logic of white society. Shaba portrayed the Holocaust as an excess of brotherly antagonism, a narrative so alien to any educated white Westerner that it was immediately mistaken for Nazi apologia. I mean, of course, Lushaba isn't exactly innocent on those grounds either, but that's a story for another time. So, Lushaba, like Bhikkhu before him, maintains a narrative of white people as never being cruel to one another, except for this one weird war where we all decided that enough was enough because some whiteys got hurt. In contradiction of all known historical evidence, Biko claimed in his book, now treated as something of a political Bible, that the worst any Europeans had ever experienced in war was a little racial admixture and linguistic bastardization. This is very stupid. But it isn't unique at all. The origin of this argument is, in fact, Aimé Césaire's essay Discourse on Colonialism from 1955. And I quote, "They tolerated that Nazism before it was inflicted on them, that they absolved it, shut their eyes to it, legitimized it, because until then it had only been applied to non-European peoples. The very distinguished, very humanistic, very Christian bourgeois of the 20th century, that without his being aware of it, he has Hitler inside him, that Hitler inhabits him, that Hitler is his demon, that if he rails against him, he is being inconsistent, and that at bottom, what he cannot forgive Hitler for is not crime in itself, the crime against man. It is not the humiliation of man as such, it is the crime against the white man, the humiliation of the white man, and the fact that he applied to Europe colonialist procedures which until then had been reserved exclusively for the Arabs of Algeria, the coolies of India, and the blacks of Africa." Okay, so what Césaire and the rest of these guys miss is a litany of contemporaneous slaughters of European peoples, which did not receive censure either. So you've got the Holodomor in Ukraine, the purges of Poland, the Ustaše in Yugoslavia, the Turkish eradication of the Greeks and Armenians, the attempted genocide of the Boers in South Africa, and countless other mass slaughters of whites, which never achieved a fraction of the status of the Holocaust. Never mind the utterly forgotten retributive slaughter, rape, and mass ethnic cleansing of Germans in 1945, which saw 14 million shipped in cattle cars in winter to Berlin, killing around 1 million of them in transit. He's also ignorant of the deadly cleansing and apartheid system used by Stalin against Soviet Germans, and of course, actually, the South Koreans, and I think Cossacks as well. Here, my point is simple. White people have been as violent to one another as any race has been. As Chomsky put it, the world wars were just the culmination of a centuries-long tradition of Europeans murdering each other. But the Holocaust special place has led ignorant men like Lushaba to fixate on it. And like many black nationalists, he envies it. He envies the special place that it accords Jews in Western discourse. I mean, like, all of us know that the reason that we... Anyway, I'll move on. The idea that the West used to at one point see notions within it, nations, not notions, that's a typo, used to at one point see nations within it as being different races is incoherent to modern ears. But it was once normal to refer to the French race, the German race, the English race in the same idiom, and the white races as a plural category. And when watching World War II or even World War I propaganda, a consistent theme emerges. A radical opposition to Germanism. So I'm just going to check. Okay, there we go. So my sign is working. Good. Where was I? Germans, Europeans. A consistent theme emerges from World War propaganda. A radical opposition to so-called Germanism. Germans were seen to, as a race, possess a barbarian quality that had to be crushed and subdued, like people such as A.J. Ayer or even Jan Smuts put it. The Anglo-dominated West did not enter the war to rescue the Jews. They went to war with the Germans to crush German power and secure global hegemony. These complications are irritating to black nationalists because black people are in their eyes the only true victims of racism, which is the highest evil, and they are thus the most injured people on the planet. In one sense, this is a fair judgment. History has been most unkind to the descendants of sub-Saharan Africa. But seeing oneself as nothing but a victim of a superior predatory beast is humiliating, especially for people of a martial character who pride themselves on their masculinity. And they feel this and remark upon the white liberal gaze fairly often. Black people, because of the insignificance of their powers on the global stage, are never critically examined as serious thinkers, and as a result are never treated to the sort of criticism white people would give each other for saying similar things. Instead, they are patronizingly co-opted, and their ideas are piecemeal appropriated by white and Jewish people for political signaling, eluding uncomfortable details that would disrupt the ideological jousting that occurs in the Western upper classes. So we, even the far left among us, tend to miss the plot and end up with the confused nonsense that calls itself woke, a white person's third stage Xerox of black race ideology. What unites these perspectives that could explain the ontology? If race is both real and biological and also socially constructed, then what is the social superstructure that the colonialists laid out over the biological substrate? Well, it is the sense of superiority and nothing else. But this has strange consequences. Black nationalism occupies a liminal space where dismissals of the Holocaust and envious diatribes about National Socialism become illegible to whites, even as they borrow radical ideas from them, like blacks can't be racist. White scholastic articulations of this particular example come as post hoc rationalizations, but they always end up being contradictory and devoid of reality, the prejudice and power argument being a primary example. Beyond the simple notion of racial superiority, what is persistent in the black nationalist literature is the notion that reason itself is a culture-specific construct not shared by black people. Very peculiar one. Now, this is largely because past Enlightenment thinkers accorded inferior powers of reasoning to Africans. The response to this notion, strangely enough, at least in very crude terms, is that reason is a game that black people can play but choose not to because it is an alien cultural trait of discourse. This can be seen in criticisms made by Biko and Emmanuel Eze, but also by Loazi Lushaba, borrowing from the only Western philosopher that the Black consciousness movement never criticizes, Heidegger. And I quote, Gelvin, I'm quoting from Lushaba's PhD thesis now, Gelvin, in an insightful commentary on Heidegger's magnum opus Being and Time, writes, even the so-called non-temporal truths of logic are temporal in the sense that they are understood by an agent or mind that is determined by temporal dimensions. Emboldened by such an understanding, we may, with a wry smile, return to Europe its categories of reason, rationality, capital, and citizenship, now visibly branded with their cultural, temporal, and historical markers. Heidegger, I think, is chosen specifically because his notion of reason is culturally embedded and absolute, and reinforces a peculiar logic of ethnic ownership inherent to the Black nationalist worldview. It is always implied that something which originates in a culture belongs to the inheritors of the blood of those people, and the same goes for any other idea. As a consequence, less educated Black people will tend to construct a sort of neo-Gnostic conspiracy of the whole world. White people lied to obscure that Black people actually made everything good and white people made everything evil. Things which are disliked will be repudiated and claimed to be a white invention. Things which are undeniably African or Black must be elevated somehow, regardless of quality. Hence, of course, the big argument over ancient Egypt, which was made by people who could neither be described as Black or white, but they have to claim it. Anyway, this is an extremely narcissistic attitude, but one that is easily seen in broken people throughout history. Germans, for example, once played silly games like this, appropriating figures from antiquity for the Aryan pantheon, from Julius Caesar to Jesus Christ, just as the wee-wuzzes of internet-educated Black nationalist diaspora do with Egypt, Beethoven, and Jesus themselves. The Germans, broken by war and reparations, a fragile, radically progressive constitution, and the financial successes of foreigners during their darkest poverty, turned to a messianic figure to rescue them. And that man said that if the Germans were united, they could never be fucked with again. The same as Black nationalists today. And Black nationalists, of course, see racism as a white invention. But what that invention is, following the embedded assumptions that Whoopi Goldberg articulated, as the rest of these authors I've mentioned so far as well, is simply the notion that Europeans are better than Africans, racism as a perceived hierarchy. So to fight this racism, Black nationalists have to fight it on two levels: material wealth and esteem. Hence, on the one hand, the support for communism and reparations, but also the persistent attack on any notion of virtue in Western society. The West must be dragged or appropriated until it holds the same relative position of esteem on the score sheet of collective esteem. And from these simple premises, that racism is white superiority, cultural artifacts and ideas are heritable intellectual property, racism is a white cultural construct, and we must eliminate racism, all other Black nationalist claims about the world become at once sensible and rational. The fundamental aim of Black nationalism is to build Black solidarity enough to level the playing field and seize power. But the bitter fact of the matter is that European culture is superior in a significant number of moral categories which are esteemed by both Black nationalists and white liberals. We were the first to abolish slavery. We were the first to realize democracy, mechanized and automated industry, and modern standards of wealth and health. Europeans created the entire global political economy and all the virtues that sustain it. And so a Black nationalist must, in these moral categories which it esteems, undermine all cultural achievements of any member of the white race in the public eye, until such time as the culture of their ancestors is esteemed equally. This requires a moral architecture built not on aspiration or ambition, but on resentment and cynicism. In the end, this project must inevitably revolve around responses to Western European culture, turning Blacks neither back upon the culture of their African forebears, nor into a new nation of its own nature, but into the shadow of white society. Racism thus becomes a deadly tar baby, sucking in short-sighted revanchists ever deeper with every blow they strike. But this is a deep and complex irony. I'm saving it for a different upcoming project. So let's turn to the Jews. The Jewish diasporan rhetorical strategy. The Jewish response to Goldberg was fairly accurate. Hitler killed the Jews because they were regarded as racially distinct interlopers, threatening the community cohesion, racial autarky, and national health. Whether Jews really are a separate race depends on how strict one's Jewish orthodoxy is, or where your sort of nationalist ideas sit on the Italian to German spectrum. So, for example, Italian fascism was initially friendly and inclusive of Jews until the Axis Pact was signed and Hitler placed pressure on Mussolini to get rid of them. The trouble with Jewishness and race is that despite many focusing on the genetic heritability of God's providence in the orthodoxy, others recognize it as a religion in which one may convert, as many hundreds of thousands did before the fall of the Second Temple and the introduction of the rule requiring 3 dissuasions to any potential convert. And Jews come in many shades, from the pale North European Ashkenazi to the mahogany of the Beta Israelis of Ethiopia. To Jewish non-racialists or anti-racists, the socially constructed aspect of race is not the hierarchy itself necessarily, but more the boundary of inclusion, because, of course, they recognize that some racial differences exist. As Yair Rosenberg's response to Whoopi elucidates, it's this boundary between different races is broad enough and fuzzy enough to be almost entirely subjective. In fact, this subjective notion of ethnicity, and I use the term ethnicity to include race and any other category you care to name, this notion of ethnicity is the same one taken by Flip Buys for the Afrikaner people, borrowing directly from a quote by Ben Gurion in the opening chapter of his manifesto on Afrikaner self-determination, Die Pad na Selfbestuur. An Afrikaner, or a Jew, knows who he is, and no one can tell him otherwise. So this ambiguity of the peculiar sense of the proposition race is constructed leads to some uneasy confusion. As a result of the controversy surrounding Whoopi Goldberg's remarks, the Anti-Defamation League got dragged into a controversy of their own. Until a few years ago, the definition of racism was discrimination on the basis of race. It was recently changed to the Black Nationalist definition, having been adopted by the intersectionalists and the critical theory crowd, whose institutional domination is a powerful lever in public discourse. Since Goldberg has taken her stance on whiteness and included Jews into it, Jewish commentators have reacted with a mixture of shock and discomfort. But the ADL, who usually take the lead on issues like this, open themselves up to ridicule because of their adoption of the Black nationalist theory of racism. And so I quoted a few comments from the ADL. This guy, Seth Mandel, he made a very, very strong comment. Because, I mean, over here you've got the different definitions of racism they went by. So the one on the right over here went for saying that racism occurs when individuals are judged according to which racial category they're put in and treated likewise. And then the one on the left over here is that usual sort of with the oppression and marginalization of people of color when they're part of a constructed racial hierarchy that privileges white people. And so that one is the Black nationalist definition, and the previous one is the sort of more objective definition of racism. So basically they just to time themselves to this comment by Whoopi Goldberg that Jewish people are white and that the Holocaust was then just white people being barbarians. They shifted the definition of racism around. Anyway, the Jewish Policy Center, a powerful Jewish think tank, lambasted the ADL for their change of definition. But the definition had been adopted over a year ago. So why now? Because it undermined one of the key weapons of collective rhetorical self-defense that Jews have as a minority in the West. Almost everybody saw that there was something silly in punishing Whoopi for what she said. And this is partially due to exhaustion with social ostracism, which is the proper term you should use for cancel culture, and partially due to the beneficence with which white people must view black people in order to remain in polite society. So, I mean, white people can't really make themselves be mean to black people very easily. They have to do something really, really bad. And as for Jewish society, we have to notice two obvious things. First, the Holocaust is a sacred event to Jews, unmatched in magnitude in the contemporary Jewish consciousness, except for the destruction of the Second Temple and the creation of Israel. And second, Jews are a wealthy minority. So, Yuri Slezkine, one of the keenest students of modern Jewish history, has come up with a taxonomy for Jews that places them amongst others of this kind, what he calls Mercurian peoples. This divides the Jewish diaspora from the Israelis, who are bonded to the soil. A similar distinction can be seen in South Africa, where Anglos are seen as rootless parasites, which, let's be honest, in many ways we are. No real loyalty to South Africa, often holding double passports. Not me, though. I've got too much Afrikaner in me. And while of Afrikaners, it is said that, banale fatsi, they have the soil, in the sense that they're married to the territory they settle on, and show a desire to build to stay rather than to merely extract and move on. So these are Slezkine's Apollonian peoples, Apollo, god of agriculture, amongst other things. So the urbanized middleman stereotype, which Slezkine describes, includes Chinese minorities in Southeast Asia, white Africans, African Indians, and of course Jews, much in the same way as Thomas Sowell's concept of middleman minorities, which is Sowell's concept perhaps works better here in South Africa, since it includes Afrikaners who have dominated the farming niche in an economy that few others seem to want, even when given the opportunity for free. So modernity provided a boon to those who were culturally suited for service-based professions, since portable, administrative, financial, mercenary, managerial, and literate skills became central to the modern economy, elevating such groups above the laboring and landbound classes. But this creates a problem. Those who have the soil naturally feel entitled to see their own kind dominate the economy, at least locally, and to have a loyal elite who shares social ties with the national community, since community cohesion is vital to the security in this mode. And I'm just going to pause here. There's someone called Mackenzie Wark who is a very weird thinker, not the greatest, but had a very, very good idea, something of the vectoral society class. This is an idea that's overstretched, but basically the concept is that if you in society form some kind of vector through which value passes, then you accrue value, much like thinking of it like nodes in any sort of network. The nodes with the most connections accrue power and wealth the most. And so that's the substance of hierarchy. And so people who play middleman in some ways, or niches, or find very, very essential niches, they will prosper more than others. Anyhow, what follows is mistrust of outsiders, resentment and insecurity, because of course the ordinary people who have the soil, natives of any territory, they don't hold all of the central nodes the same way the middleman minorities will end up, And of course, those who have fewer ties to the majority and are detached from territorial concerns have far less skin in the game and will naturally be less concerned with preserving the institutions of the Apollonian societies they live off. So waves of social instability will fracture a nation and cause fault lines along class, region, and subnational ethnicity. This is normal. Englishmen, right, whatever. To use coercion, or even violence, and it is common to expel or wage war against a scapegoat ethnicity to achieve conscious unity. That scapegoat is likely to be the most dissimilar minority in one's midst, especially if that minority is disproportionately well off. This creates a perennial problem. As Philip Gurevich puts it, genocide, after all, is an exercise in community building. So you see this black South Africans, Germans, even black and white Americans, both some of them end up looking at the world this way. Mercurian peoples will naturally form political interests like anyone else, except these must naturally differ from the majority. And since the majority represents a perennial populist threat, Jewish and other minority political rhetoric will seek out coalition partners in the debate over culture and politics. Liberals, communists, other minorities, foreign states, anyone who could weaken the potential for hostile populism. Even we in South Africa do this. We seek out alliances and solidarity with the colored and Indian populations, the immigrants, traditional African communities, the free marketeers. I mean, yeah, this is a chisel strategy. One chips away at the ideas and social coalitions which constitute a possibility of hostile majoritarianism in order to preserve one's way of life as a successful minority. In the West, the key division is to exploit the left-right distinction, where one can see Jewish lobbyists and intellectuals making common cause with the Christian right on foreign policy while befriending the left on social policy. The complementary dissolving strategy, which aims to foster tolerance and acceptance of difference by diluting or rebuking the traditional cohesive norms of the community through a cosmopolitan ethic, liberal tolerance, and cultural pluralism. Consequently, a Jewish political rhetoric, and indeed actually white liberal rhetoric in South Africa, has for some time seen black people as a sympathetic coalition partner, but also as a useful wedge to extract liberal concessions from Western society. Many Jews consider themselves non-white, or white-passing people of color in newspeak, although regarded as white by Palestinians with matching skin tone to them who identify as non-white while celebrating Hitler, which is just, yeah. Largely because of the Holocaust and the way German ideas of Aryan supremacy translated in the Anglosphere's notion of whiteness. It fuses the age-old animosity between Jews and Gentiles into an unbroken historiography of racial blood feud. Many Jewish people, as a consequence, despite being visibly white, overwhelmingly genetically European, and acculturated into Western society for centuries, range themselves in diametric opposition to it. As outsiders to Western society, at least self-perceived, although they are clearly very much part of the West and a major contributor to it, they find themselves overwhelmingly on the political left, seeking out those political ideas that weaken the tendencies to ethno-nationalistic or religious homogeneity, which carries the ever-present threat, and it's a real threat, let's not kid ourselves, to ethnic or religious minorities. But this chiseling and dissolving, which attacks both unity and pride, can destabilize society if it's too successful and create the very conditions right for fascism, since after a certain point, only violent fanaticism can rescue a nation from oblivion. A firm case can be made that this is what we have done to black South Africans. So here we get to South Africa in a more focal way. English liberals in South Africa prefer this dissolving strategy and are a particular focus of Lushaba's ire. The preface to his PhD focuses on the patronizing and scornful attitude condescended to by liberals upon the girls of the traditional reed dance ceremony. If you're not South African, this is where young girls are. They gather, thousands of them gather. They're usually around 16, and they're supposed to be virgins, and they're often tested for it. Although this is kind of taboo a little bit in the modern age, and they dance for the Nguni royalty. And I don't know how many of the Xhosa nations do it. I know it's very big in the Zulu nation and the Swazi nation. But so a lot of these girls will come and they'll wear reed skirts, and they'll be topless, and they'll dance for the king. And then in Swaziland, or they'll still choose. They'll still choose wives from the king will still choose wives from them, and so this is kind of considered by a couple of liberal people to be sort of barbaric and backwards and patriarchal and so on. And maybe you can have that opinion, but the point is, Lushaba really doesn't like this because it's liberals imposing their Western standards. Okay, open borders, multicultural inclusion. Zuma bad, Ramaphosa good. Those are two recent presidents. Put South Africa first. That's a Black Nationalist movement for native South Africans. Put South Africa first is bad. Zimbabwean migrant labor is good. So both strategies kind of go hand in hand. The Afrikaner nationalists' dominant rhetorical strategy itself is a sort of chiseling strategy. The various African nations are overemphasized in their blackness. Blackness only becomes more important in white spaces, really. The various African nations are emphasized over their blackness. So more being Zulu and Xhosa than being black, until, of course, they're in white company. So separate development was the only potential means of avoiding the present condition, though it was too late by the time it was even given a name. I mean, the Afrikaners only really inherited the state for real in the late 40s. And by then, South Africa had already deeply entrenched itself as a structure, so it was a bit late. So we conservatives, just like the liberals, would very much like to see black South Africans pursue less of their black nationalist project, because it comes with a threat to our survival, and similar projects do everywhere else. Black people may be a favorite chisel to wield in the West, but because Jews are also comfortable in high society, it makes black Westerners suspicious of them, as Louis Farrakhan demonstrates. So the same goes for us and colored South Africans. To them, we are useful allies against black majoritarianism, but they also bear witness to our relative wealth and proximity to powerful institutions, and the long history of our crimes of exploitation and violence against them, and our comfort amongst our own kind, which truthfully makes us a kind of fickle ally. Black political rhetoric's primary aim regarding Jews, whether expressed through anti-Semitism or philo-Semitism, is to build black solidarity and power in white society. And you've got to understand, black South Africans still see South Africa as a white society because the Constitution and the law are Western in nature, and white people still own significant chunks of the economy. So as a disempowered group, finding elite coalitions is traditionally out of reach for black Westerners. But in South Africa, the black struggle is against local inequality and the international political economy and the legal system, which is dominated by the West, and of which much of the white minority is an integral part. So this creates fertile ground for the propagation of theories identical to those found amongst white nationalists. The Zionist-occupied government, or ZOG, is identical in structure to the theory of white monopoly capital, which we find over here, which posits that whites, irrespective of being Jew or Gentile, own everything in South Africa, and that the ownership is achieved through black economic empowerment, is just a deputization of token askaris, that's the local term for house Negro, to guard the white man's factories. The peculiar local reality is that South African Jews have persisted in adopting the chiseling and dissolving strategies, not against blacks, but against whites, even though we are, politically defeated and our territory has been burst open, even though the black majority considers them white and complicit in apartheid domination. This is now a case of ideological inertia, driven by long cultural memories from Europe and stoked by Afrikaner anti-Semitism. I mean, let's not be silly. Afrikaners have long been extremely suspicious of Jews. And so we have people like Jack Markowitz, who came out to support the EFF as they rallied to threaten some lower-class Afrikaans school children in Brackenfell, or Kim Heller, a woman who's devoted years of her life to promoting the most openly genocidal black leaders while selling herself as a fellow white who realizes her privilege. She is a very intelligent person, but is either very corrupt, deeply spiteful, or both. Others, like Professor Stephen Friedman, are simply old struggle loyalists, but they all engage in a very dangerous game by supporting black National Socialism. The fact that black radicals, even moderates, tend to be virulently anti-Israel and highly focused on the Jewish component of white monopoly capital seems not to have registered with them. The ANC and the more radical types still bear a grudge against Israel for supporting the apartheid state, and local Jews for profiteering off the Group Areas Act clearances. For example, many older colored people remember that they were removed from Constantia and bought out by a mainly Jewish consortium. So those who have realized the folly of this, the majority of the former Jewish population of South Africa, in fact, have already left the country. So, I mean, I think it's about 2/3 have already left the country in the modern, in the democratic age, because they've seen the destruction wrought by the ANC. Those who remain tend to do so because there are still many comfortable niches in which to avoid the consequences of ANC rule for the time being. I mean, let's be honest, there are little enclaves where one can live a totally nice, comfortable middle-class life. But the attack on the cohesion of one's own Etic ethnic group is not unique to, by the way, Etic means viewed from outside, is not unique to this particular situation. Jews in the past have even sided with the Nazis out of a desire to assimilate and a feeling of distinction to their more orthodox countrymen who spoke Yiddish. Max Naumann and his followers supported the German National Socialists right until they were confronted by the obvious nature of the persecutions, but by then it was too late and they rotted in concentration camps. So in the last few decades in America, Jews have had to deal with very little in the way of persecution by historical standards anyway, but times are changing. Support for Palestine over Israel is becoming less and less taboo in the ruling class, demonstrating a significant loss of vital soft power. And as the demographics of the West shift, Jews are becoming targets of street violence again. But the people attacking Jews today are increasingly Black people and Muslims. So, I mean, and I quote a couple of articles on the point, which, just for evidence sake. And the second one is on, France, where Jews are retreating from traditionally Jewish suburbs into other suburbs to concentrate. And this probably explains people like Eric Zemmour, who also has the experience of living as a member of French society in Algeria as the Pieds Noirs were expelled. It also explains the editorial shift in Tablet magazine, which is one of the finest publications in the mainstream, to anti-wokeism. So this is it's a Jewish diaspora magazine. They've realized that the now unstoppable wave of cultic idiocy that is intersectionalism and postmodern degeneracy has little care for the violence inflicted on Jews unless it's done by white people who have learned to be a lot more quiet and less self-confident as the years have worn on. Being a Jewish minority in a high-trust homogenous society which considers anti-Semitism a taboo is ideal. But being a Jewish minority in a heterogeneous society only works if none of the neighboring ethnicities tolerate anti-Semitism. And that's a much harder game to win, and one that requires far too many strategies to coordinate. If one thing can be grasped from Whoopi Goldberg's little debacle, it's that nobody really listens to or understands one another. Jews do not listen to blacks, who don't care about Jews so much as resent whites, who are trying to simply escape demonization as the new cultural revolution rolls on. Well, whatever happens to Whoopi, I'm sure she'll be fine, but here down south and in the boroughs of the Western metropoles, the nature of her rhetorical persuasions will remain vital warnings to the brittle nature of ethnic relations in a multicultural society. While the Holocaust retains a sacred position in common memory, that memory is fading, and the main historiographical taboo is increasingly becoming colonialism, which has the Belgian Congo and the Nama Herero genocide on its scorecard. On the right, attention is increasingly being drawn to the scale of carnage committed by the communists, for which many makes Hitler seem less special. And since the entire post-war order is centered on the narrative created from the ashes of World War II to justify the brutality of the Allies, I mean, let's not kid ourselves that these people were really doing it to save the Jews. They were not. The Holocaust occupies a unique place in history. As many people right and left have observed, Adolf Hitler is the most influential individual of the 20th century. Today, our Western political morality still centers on his legend and the narratives that surround him. All enemies of progress are compared to Adolf Hitler in one way or another, and in the United States, we saw not only Donald Trump, but Barack Obama and George Bush compared to Hitler by their less articulate critics. The universalization of Hitler's worldview is as an essential feature of Western culture by the Frankfurt School has seen white supremacy become the fulcrum along which all political discourse is conducted today. In South Africa, we see a parallel in our recrimination of superficial similarities to apartheid. Criticals of vaccine passports often deploy a facile comparison to apartheid or to fascism, and the continuity of apartheid as colonialism of a special kind has served to knit these threads together for South African writers. The temptation for political outsiders remains the simple inversion. Once a political order is identified as being undesirable, the resentful outsider will tend to invert all of its values and practices, declare all of its historical opponents his friends, declare all sins it denounces as being virtues. This is all too apparent in younger progressives tempted to entertain the stupid and depraved government programs of Bolshevism and Marxist third worldism. The new liberal progressive synthesis of intersectionality and critical theory, what we now call woke, is founded on this precise idiotic impulse, which has given black nationalism the podium it ill deserves, among other things. In the same way, many on the right, awakened from their quiet conservative slumber by progressive intrusions into their cultural strongholds, have resorted to some form of race nationalism. This has resulted in the tiny minority of political illiterates and lunatics becoming easy targets for elements of the progressive order who wish to paint the entire white race as an existential threat to all of humanity and justify a continual ratcheting of state repression and persecution of ordinary conservatives engaging in reasonable political activism. For example, the FBI's use of counterterrorist legislation to target parent-teacher associations or who are critical of anti-white and sexual libertine curricula in the United States. So after the war, many German philosophers and historians wrangled with how to remember the Holocaust and what lessons to learn from it. So we got this thing called the Historikerstreit. And it was won rather decisively by those adjacent to the Frankfurt School, who argued that an eternal collective guilt had to be preserved, which could never be paid off. As a consequence, German politics is perpetually seized by a fragile neurosis. On the one hand, many Germans pride themselves on having no national pride or sense of identity. Merkel's highly divisive policy of accepting millions of undocumented immigrants was based on the negation of national interest for the sake of morality, and compared the Syrian refugees to the Jews in public discourse. As a result of the violence these immigrants inflicted on the native population, Germany was forced to push them into other neighboring countries and made the EU impose immigrant quotas. The political fallout threatens to tear apart the EU still, and is played out in the eastern border regions as Russia and Belarus collaborate to funnel Middle Eastern migrants across the Polish border as a destabilization tactic. On the other hand, the German opposition party Alternative for Deutschland has absorbed a great deal of angry German nationalists, many of whom entertain fantasies of restoring the reputation of the mid-century National Socialist regime. This has made them easy targets for political criticism and attracted cranks and outsiders who have made the party extremely unstable and placed a hard ceiling on their political ambitions as they become ridiculed and scorned by the majority of the population. In South Africa, Hitler is no less of an object of fascination, though usually as a distant Platonic form to which white South Africans are compared through our ancestors in positions of local political authority. The emerging academic narrative increasingly sees Hitler not as a bad man. Many student activists and academics have tried to reduce the singular significance of Hitler, although all of these people are black. These are usually National Socialists themselves, though in the name of black power and decolonization in the Haitian sense, a Kristallnacht for settlers. What they accuse Hitler of is being an ordinary white person, boorish, uncultured, homicidal, and greedy. The program of the Frankfurt School has reached its apogee. We cannot speak sensibly about politics in this way. In order to escape this vicious cycle of recrimination and false purification, we must find a way of cancelling Hitler. And not in the sense that online progressives use the term, which means erase or ostracism, but in a different sense. That employed by the notoriously convoluted German philosopher Georg Hegel. In his dialectical theory, the political thought proceeds through positive affirmation, then negation, then finally a full rational incorporation into discourse through Aufhebung, sort of cancellation of polar significance, the negation of the negation. But this is not a simple inversion like the first negation, it's the synthesis of the binary antagonism. To do this, we must make Hitler human again and confront the violence which pervades the human spirit. This is shades of Whoopi Goldberg again, but I have a slightly different point. The Holocaust may have been unique in some ways, but it does not stand alone sui generis. Genocides occur periodically throughout history, and the horror which awaits its witness is a vision of the human soul. Rwanda, the Mfecane, Cambodia, Haiti, the Holodomor, and countless other slaughters of greater or lesser magnitude occur every generation somewhere on Earth, and they must nevertheless be seen with the gravity they deserve. So Hitler teaches us nothing if he's just white. He teaches us nothing if he's seen as a demon. But if he is seen as a human being with all the frailty that entails, and his victims are seen as human beings with all the venality that entails, we stand a chance of apprehending lessons which might help us evade similar excesses of human depravity, not only from being committed in our name, but of happening to us in the name of his negation. The necessity for South Africans is that we are increasingly seeing National Socialism for Black people emerge ever stronger with every year. Philosophers like Ndumiso Tlatla, Lwazi Lushaba, and Mogobe Ramose remain potently hostile to minorities, and their political equivalents in the ANC's RET faction, the EFF, and elsewhere remain a perennial reminder that civil conviviality is a fragile state of affairs. The irony is that the solution lies, at least partially, in the remarks of these anti-colonialist thinkers. To forget the universality of the West and remember it is just one part of the world, just one culture, and just one set of ethnic relations, and that these are not only different elsewhere, but are not even eternal within it. It is imperative to forget our taboos and realize that ethnic coalitions and conflicts are inevitable, and humanist universalism is a pipe dream, especially when it is founded on historical crimes. There is no rainbow utopia coming, and there never was. Coexistence is struggle. It's also mandatory. Righty-ho then. Where are we? Here we are. Okay, so that's the essay. Now, I'm going to go back up through the list, and I'm going to see what everybody has said so far, and then I'm going to just answer every question, or just until I feel I don't want to do it anymore. Bum, 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 bum. Usual faces. Hello, hello, hello. Someone says, how's it out there in the Netherlands? I left the Netherlands in May of last year, and so I've been living in the Cape ever since. Someone says, I disagree. Since 2018, the Jews and Black people are the most privileged. Complex thing to respond to there, but I mean, there's certainly an argument to be made for that, particularly in South Africa. Very clearly there's racially discriminatory laws, all kinds of stuff, and in the West, Jews are very, very protected. Like, you can't criticize them in any sort of generalized sense, and one has to be very circumspect if one wants to make criticisms, the way that one would for any other ethnicity, even one's own. So it's important to be polite, I should say. My favorite line in your article, but seeing oneself as nothing but a victim of superior predatory beast is humiliating. Yeah, I'm afraid so. New York is a large dominance from Irish Catholics and Jews. Yeah, it's funny that, because if you measure the British biracial hierarchy, you get the top of the pyramid is Catholics, Sikhs, and Jews. Anyhow. Black Excellence and Abundance channel taught me everything I need to know. That's a good remark. I like that. Professor Lushab Hashem, the man's trying. Essay right after the camps got to run essay themselves. Who would have thought it can work like that? I'm not sure about that sentence construction, friend. I can't quite grasp what your meaning is. First, many were forced away from their European countries, often with a lot of violence. Yeah, yes and no. I mean, mostly just the French Huguenots. The rest of them sort of just showed up because they wanted work. Can Afghanistan work in 22 or 23? What, the war or the country? I mean, doing an Afghan war again wouldn't work. Can Afghanistan work as a solution to South Africa? Turning everyone into mountain hermit fanatics with rifles and stuff. Don't think it's going to happen, friendo. Jesse Randolph, hello. Dagbreker, I can point this out. There are reasons why some are recognized as Afrikaner and some are recognized as Boers, but there are texts from the 1800s commenting about this division. Yeah, I remember there's a guy called Barend Eis who works for Solidariteit, and he said that. Oh, hello, dog. How are you doing? Anyway, Barend Eis was saying that there are three sorts of Afrikaners: the Afrikaner, the Boer, and the Takar. And he's one of the Takara. Yeah. So Gopelang Lekotso asking, it's a question to Dagbreker, but he says, do you consider Afrikaners, Boers as separate ethnicities or perhaps even different races? A complex question there. I suppose it depends it depends. But there is a very big difference between urbanized Afrikaners and people who are Boer. And even amongst former Boers who became urbanized and Cape Afrikaners, there's a fairly big dividing line there. Prince of Parma, there we go. I feel sorry for my South Africans, especially the white population. What if the SA coloreds grew up in the Netherlands? How different would their lives be? Probably a lot different, because the Netherlands is run really, really well, and people would be very interested to hear from their background story. So right up until the point at which they start talking about how society needs to be radically more conservative, it might not go down too well. Anyway, the constant parallels between modern Black nationalism and German National Socialism show that despite racial differences, human beings share the same nature. Yeah, pretty much. So here we go. So someone says, okay, more talk about Bafokeng Tswana, more associated with platinum mining, blah, blah, blah. Discussion. Next question. Where are we? Okay, that's more chit chat. I think there is some miscommunication here, but I think Rob himself actually has a perfect explanation of this. Maybe we should have him address it a bit later. Okay, well, we'll see as it goes on. Afrikaners and Dutch heritage. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Robert is making a good point here. It's like driving a car. The lessons are designed to make you neurotic. When in reality, you don't drive that way. It's very deranging if you stick your head in this kind of theory for too long. You start crumbling. Some people just choose to remain neurotic as it creates a false sense of safety. Blah blah blah. Hypochondria. To get used to the stash. Well, it doesn't look great in this light because it's very blonde, so it sort of blends in with my skin tone in this light. Anyway, I look so much more Afrikaans. Oh, baie dankie, meneer. Dankie dat jy gesê het. Okay, hoe hard kap daai bier? Yeah, no, it's actually a Windhoek. It says, here we go. In case we have to develop an Afghanistan scenario, I should be fine. I learned to say faster in Arabic in case of a camel getaway chase. Okay. So far, that's about all the questions you appear to have for me, which don't appear very deep at all. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to sit here for 5 minutes and eat some leftover casserole roast, and I'll wait for you to ask a few questions, and then I'll answer them as they come up. And if there aren't any questions after I'm finished with this little bowl, I'm going to log off. How's that? I'm sorry. I can't keep a straight face. But this article I actually wrote while I was busy working on. The reason I could quote Lushaba's work so well is actually because I'm working on. There's this essay that I'm working on. It's a very duck one on the three big living Black consciousness thinkers, and then the old sort of two big giants in South Africa, which are Steve Biko and Robert Sobukwe. And Yeah, so that's going to be interesting when it comes up, but it's like it's academically cited and everything, so it's going to be published hopefully with it's going to be published with Opinor, which is the think tank for um yeah. So that's coming up in some time. Here we go. Here we got a question. Um so what if alt history predicts South Africa will break into four distinctive countries, with Limpopo, Gauteng, and Northwest being absorbed by Botswana? Thoughts? Yeah, not possible. Not even remotely possible. The divisions he's drawn up on nuts. Completely nuts. Botswana can maybe grab Northwest in the best case scenario. They might be able to reach into some of the platinum fields in Gauteng. But I think the likelihood is that South Africa is going to split into East and West, and not much more than that. So you'll have like this sort of South Africa, Azania, and then you'll have the Cape. And yeah, because we already have the Cape Independence Movement, there's a chance that the Zulus could break away as well, but there's not much chance that anyone else will. Especially not the Xhosa. They're the most married to this black nationalist idea of any group in South Africa, largely because they've dominated the ANC and the Black consciousness movement for like more than 100 years now. Is that a cat or a dog? It's a dog. It's actually my sister-in-law's dog. It's a little whippet, rather pathetic little thing. Very cute, but also just very sort of emotionally very sad, very neurotic. Hey, Rob, can you go over your view on Moldbug's explanation of oligarchy and the expansion of power under liberalism? Like, if I'm correct, it's actually very similar to the juveniles. I haven't read Moldbug for about a year or more. Actually, no. The last time I read his original arguments would have been probably about 2 or 3 years ago. So I'm going to give you a very fuzzy answer at best, and I'm probably going to be completely wrong. Because I didn't quite buy everything he was saying, but he had a few little things that made points and things that I've seen again and again. So I think his idea is that, naturally, as everyone becomes institutionalized, there's an incentive to break down the norms and so on at the local level that tie people together and absorb that power into the state. Because liberalism. Sorry, I'm actually giving the juvenile's answer because I know that Moldbug actually read the juvenile. So the idea is that you've got all these sort of strong prejudicial and discriminatory norms that exist at a local level that structural institutions like churches and local ethnic groups and so on. And the basic idea is that by offering to intervene violently whenever these local community sort of norms are enforced, the state frees you from those communities, but then makes you dependent on the state. And so you feel more free in a whole bunch of different ways while actually losing all of your freedom to the central authority. But Moldbug actually thinks this is good. He wants everything to be sort of very efficiently run. Whereas I don't like it very much. I'm much more sort of this very, very uncool sort of very local. Like, I don't like government overreach because the more abstract a system becomes, the less capable it is to actually reflect human desires and human needs, and it becomes very, very distorting of human culture. So large-scale organization is something I really, really don't like. And I mean, you can see that the larger that any kind of country is, the worse off its people are, generally speaking. So you need to sort of tailor make your norms and so on to localized communities, which are going to have their own character because of ethnic background, geography, educational levels, incomes, economics, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so smaller is better. Where are we going? I missed a question there. Oh yeah, thoughts on Ukraine situation. Whose fault, NATO or Russia? Probably NATO. I mean, Russia's just really sort of digging itself in and saying, enough is enough. Don't come any closer. Please respect the boundaries that we drew in the 1990s. And nobody wants this war at all. Really, it's really, really horrible. And the Russians haven't changed anything. And the interesting thing is that you'd expect, if the Russians were aiming for some kind of war of aggression, that they'd be amping up their native population and going, "Oh, look, we're all going to war," patriotic feelings. But they're not really talking about it very much, on their news networks or anything. The Americans, on the other hand, had tried to stoke it up, but the thirst for this kind of stuff is not there anymore. The people are really, really done with foreign adventures, like completely. I mean, you listen to like Tucker Carlson is not like the biggest person to watch for even Democrats between 20 and 35. So, and what's his perspective on this? It's like, we shouldn't be going overseas to bugger with foreign nations. We've got problems at home. We should focus on at home. So, that's that perspective, and I think it carries across boundaries. It's only really sort of this upper crust, very sort of idiotic, midwit, sort of PMC class that really likes this foreign adventurism anyway. How narrow is Black nationalism, in your opinion, outside of humanities and academia? I just don't see it. Well, in South Africa, it's actually broader than you think. And the way that you've got to figure it out is that most people will have these ideas and then just not care very much about articulating them. It's kind of like you'll get people who get on, you'll find Afrikaners who get on extremely well. Like, let's say, they're like very rural Boers, they're very conservative, but they'll get along with everybody, and you don't think they have any, you don't think they have any sort of radical views on anything. And then you'll scratch them and poke them and pick an argument with them, and they'll come out with, or you'll have a long drinking session with them, and you'll come out with, at basis, what organizes their worldview is maybe like quite a solid racial one, and they might believe in the vow, for example. And the same goes for for Black Africans. So you can be hanging out with a friend of yours, and then you pick his brains about what he really thinks, like what he would do if the government confiscated land from all white people, and you go, yeah, but they kind of should, like. And you really have to sort of push with very sort of delicate persuasion to get someone to change their perspectives on these things. It's very widespread. A lot of people don't really care whether white people, but that, or it'd be good if it happened, or something like that. So you get shades of intensity, but there's a lot of commonality, because the intellectuals who formed this movement, they had a very, very big impact. I mean, the Soweto uprising was the very thing that reignited the anti-apartheid movement in the 1970s. Absolutely huge. I mean, there's people in the colored communities and Black communities as well who their kids are named Biko, like they're named after these people. It's Steve Biko's book is the most stolen book from South African libraries. It's a statistic I fucking love, because it shows you exactly what people are reading here. And so I think it's a very important thing to pay attention to, because all of the major academics in the universities always defer to these people. Like, I mean, Loazi Lushaba is being invited to white girls' private high schools to teach white children, how much they suck and deserve to die. For parents, for thousands and thousands of rands. It's extraordinary. It's because of this whole sort of critical race theory thing that's hitting the schools over here as well. And it's extraordinary because they'll both deny it and write it straight into the curriculum. It's the most sort of blatant gaslighting nonsense. I hate that neologism, but I don't really have a sort of analogy for it, an analogous phrase for it. Organize a South African event. Actually, I was thinking of holding like a regular sort of reading club somewhere here in Wellington, and sort of just inviting people who are sort of like thinkers to come and chit chat about a common reading once a month or once every fortnight or something like that. Probably have it at like the Breitenbach Center or something. Just I would like to meet up with people because Wellington's quite a quiet town, and most people tend to be fairly not interested in intellectual stuff, or even if they are, they don't really read very much. Most people just want to get on with their lives, pretty much, not worry about this stuff. But I'd like to talk about this because it's what I'm doing for a living. It's my vibe. What can the Cape do under the current administration to secure its borders more? Well, funny enough, it's not actually a border issue. The way you've got to think about it is in terms of, well, who lives where? And the one thing you can do in order to change the demographic balance, if you really, really wanted to solve that problem, which is, I mean, as I'll define the problem, it's more that you'll have people who come and settle here for the express purpose of taking advantage of grants and labor, but really despise the people who've lived here for hundreds of years, or millennia, if you're looking at the color population. And it's that sort of sense of entitlement combined with a sort of spiteful resentment that makes immigrants from the Eastern Cape fit in rather poorly. And I mean, obviously, they're not all like that, but it is a bit of a feature that you'll come across occasionally, and it makes it very difficult to, yeah. Anyhow, so most of these people don't vote for it, so it's not really a problem at the moment, but it will become a problem over time because the DA, for example, is falling in the polls in the Western Cape, and I think 2024 is the last time that they'll get an outright majority of the province. That's my prediction, because they've already slipped to 53% from their previous 2/3. I mean, they were as high as 75%, I think, for two elections ago. But yeah, no, that's not going to look good because they're the only party who actually can govern. It's really the end. I mean, once they go, it's done for. It's like there's nothing, and they're sort of clapping themselves on the back for their gains in Gauteng and so on, and that one place they won in. I can't remember what it's called. It's not Ulundi. It's something else. But it's in the middle of the KwaZulu-Natal. They won it. They got this sort of white guy who can speak Zulu quite fluently, and so he won that constituency. But it's not going anywhere. I mean, they're hitting a ceiling, and it's done for. They're done for as a party. So what the Cape can really do is move. If they can really get hold of the tenants in the squatter camps and sort of evict people who are illegally settling on land, that will change things around. But it's not going to happen right now because the squatters' rights laws are very, very strict. And the DA doesn't have the will to really push back on this. It's really, really egregious because it destroys everything. Because you can just steal someone's land by building a house on it. You can destroy its economic potential completely, and no one can remove you or any of your building materials. It's nuts. So, Dagbreker says, we have a huge division between the warrior types and men of letters types. And do you have any thoughts on how to bring these two together? Would you host a Host Don the Pleb for a conversation. I know Don the Pleb. I've had a chat with him. Had a few chats with him. He's a nice guy. But I don't think there's a real. I don't think we need to worry too much about this. Warrior types and men's of letters. I mean, the thing is, you can't just somehow bring them together. I think you have to actually seek out material common interests. So, for example, here in South Africa, we have this thing called Solidariteit, and that has connections to neighborhood watch units, connections to private security, things like that. But we also have this intellectual wing of the movement in AfriForum and so on, and also connected through the universities and so on. And academia and all of this. And there are organizational connections, but these people aren't going to talk directly to each other, I don't think. The likelihood of that is very slim, because the kind of ideas that what you call warrior types and the kind of ideas that men of letters types are interested in are very different. They appeal to different levels of social organization. So if you speak to your sort of old recce's or whatever, they could be very astute. They can have very good understanding of how things work, but they could be the way they'll be looking at things would be to say, how would I personally, in my capacity that I have now, approach the problem in a given situation? And they're only looking at one sliver of it. And someone like myself is very sort of has his eye on general beliefs, hierarchies, organizations, bureaucracy, that kind of stuff. I'm not really going to be looking at the military end too closely. I keep it in mind, but it's not my focus. I'm focusing on my little niche over here, and there will come a time where the different sectors come together. But I mean, the main point is to just find organizations or build them. It doesn't matter what they look like; just put them together, and eventually different groups find common cause over large scale political issues, and they form coalitions. These coalitions become bigger institutions as part of movements. And so if you look at the cluster around Solidariteit, you've got everything from primary and they're working on secondary and primary education, but what they really want, what they've really got done now, they're building tertiary education systems, they're building security systems, they're building housing markets, labor markets, welfare systems, all kinds of stuff for Afrikaners and anyone who wants to join sort of the broader Afrikaner community. And so this sort of cluster, everyone in every different vision doesn't always look at the same things. If I speak to some of the senior guys in AfriForum or Solidariteit who are focused on security, they talk completely differently. They're not interested in my abstract esoteric stuff. And we can find stuff to talk about because we do share obvious interests, but the focus is different because they just have different jobs. Society is really large and complicated. You can't have everybody focusing on the same problems at the same time. There's a big general problem that you can sort of say we can agree on, but everyone's got to organize in their own little lane and then converge where they need to. And I don't think we should worry too much about it as long as we're, making friends and influencing people and getting together and organizing and just getting out of the house, or at least getting out into the internet and finding people to chat to. That's kind of important. So, Fluckfark says, can you have on Patrick Deneen or join Adams van Sale when he interviews him? Wow, I didn't even think to interview Patrick Deneen. I mean, this is a very casual. Sorry, I'm just going to put this. Someone's trying to call me. Nick Hudson. Oh, shit, Nick Hudson. Hold on. I'm just going to do this. Sorry. Hi, Nick. Could I call you back in just 5 minutes? All right, man. Cheers. Alrighty. I'm going to answer I'm going to pick a couple of questions, and then answer them quickly, and then I've got to take that phone call because I don't want to waste the man's time. Uh, I told him I'd talk to him earlier today, and then yeah, or rather, I asked to speak to him earlier today, and he said he'd call me back. Blah blah blah. Um, Small is better. Don't you think economics often gets in the way of localism? Yes, it is a complicated bloody project. You have to actually leverage people's loyalties in very specific ways, and it's hard upstream stuff because a lot of people will prefer to seek their personal or family interest above group interest, and a lot of people don't have lifestyle identifications and things. It's always going to be difficult. You just got to do it. Um, and don't worry about whether there's going to be conflicts. Worry about how those conflicts arise and how to deal with them as best you can. And a lot of the time, it's going to be winging it. I think a lot of people just bloody wing it and then see what works. And I think that's probably the best way to go around things. That's how I'm seeing it. You're probably going to screw up, but I mean, everyone does. So, um, I mean, I screwed up when I bottled the attempt to start a newspaper. So like it happens. You just got to try something. I mean, I still own the little company, so I'll maybe turn into something like I don't know what. I'll figure something out. I'll make use of it. Yeah, possibly China invading Taiwan in the next decade. Oh, I'd put close to 100%. That's not even like everyone knows that's coming. Yeah. The nation that will insist on drawing lines of demarcation between the fighting man and the thinking man is liable to find its fighting done by fools and thinking done by cowards. Hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, look, those lines don't make those lines too hard and fast. But my point is that like people will naturally go where they need to go. There's some people who understand both areas of life, some people who understand neither. And you go it and just keep in mind what you want done in the world and move towards it. Stumble towards it if you have to. Do the Swiss have a perfect system? No. Does anyone who has a perfect system? No. Um, Swiss have some stuff I like. Singaporeans have some stuff I like. Um, Geez, I mean, even the Americans have some stuff that I like, as horribly broken as their society is. I even admire some aspects of the British Constitution, which is failing very, very badly. Um, you can always borrow ideas from somewhere. Just, read stuff, see what you like, see what actually applies to your personal situation. Don't um and you'll feel it out. The more you talk to others in like-minded circles, the more you sort of are going to feel out where the true sort of center is between all of these various sort of ideas for your guys. Like you'll feel what that naturally looks like. And if you fixate too much on an ideal mimicking someone else, you're going to screw it up because your people, whoever they are not like anyone else. They're not even like themselves in the past. So try to find a way of tailor making your way of looking at the world to what is actually in front of you. What really is in front of you. That's what I would suggest, whoever you are. Also, don't understand why Ukraine is worth defending for the United States. Yeah, it isn't. It's stupid. Why? Well, I don't know. Distraction, corruption, fixation on a long dead project. There's lots of different reasons. So the neo conservative neoliberal thingy. They're people who really, really, really believe in that kind of foreign policy model. I mean, people actually think Dick Cheney was, this pure, psychopath, blah blah blah. Because everyone's seen that film, that really well made film. I'll admit, with what's his name, Christian Bale, did a fantastic job as the man, but. That's not accurate. If you actually read the documents, the memos that he wrote from as far back as 1990, he really talks very almost evangelically about a global liberal order. He really believes in that sort of liberal evangel. So there are a lot of people in both parties who really believe in this sort of global liberal order. Every country must look like the United States. It's very stupid. There's arms manufacturers are making money off this. There's cynical people everywhere who will find an angle for all of the worst ideas. Don't worry about it. I mean, it's always multiple causes. Putin doesn't seem like a shit stirrer. Well, he's. I think the best analogy for Putin is actually Bugs Bunny. Like, he's a vicious son of a bitch, but he only does something if you provoke him. I think that's probably the best way to look at it. Just like he did the same thing with oligarchs. He says, keep your money, but you cause trouble. I put you in jail and kill your family, blah, blah, blah. So Putin is fine. Don't poke him. He will go nuclear. Okay, he won't literally go nuclear. I don't think he's that stupid. Anyway, free localized communities in the West. I'm going to keep going until 45, and then I'm just going to close this wherever the hell I am. First come, first serve. Free localized communities in the West will continue to disappear, and power will centralize under the guise of fighting climate change is the way out. It was the only way collapse. I think it'll just run out of energy, and then we're going to go through a long gray period where no one knows which direction things are going, which is probably going to be this decade. And then we'll see in the next decade. I think we're going to see some really spicy things happening in the 30s, and that's my prediction. But I don't know where they're going to go. Am I religious? Yes, I am a Christian. I tend towards the Eastern Orthodox, but I haven't yet visited my my local, because the nearest one is in Robertson, and that's a fair way away, and I don't have a car. So, I mean, I'll have one in a little while, but for now, yeah. So we'll figure something out. We'll rewrite. Only 53% of the Western Cape DA might be finished. Yes. Shame that people just don't realize that they don't see they need to actually secede. There is no other option, or every part of South Africa will be permanently doomed in a dramatic way, because the Afrikaners, we can do enclave society for maybe a couple of decades, and then it's going to start getting horrible, like unlivable. There will come a point where we can't do it, and we're going to have to actually seize territory. There's anyway. There's no way to divorce the Eastern Cape from the West. There are too many people who have history in the entirety of the Cape Colony. Don't think so. You draw that boundary at the Fish River. There's plenty of ways you can build narratives around this. The truth of the matter is, any nation has to found itself on a narrative, and there are many ways you can construct that narrative. And yes, there is a big blur, and I think this is the thing the Black Nationalists are right on. There's a tug of war for the heritage of colored people between white and black, and both. The thing is, he thinks that the white perspective is a lie and the black perspective is the truth. And I sort of think, well, both of them have observed some obviously correct things. So something that I'm going to be mentioning in the upcoming paper I'm working on is the malicious and horrific way that black people have treated the native South Africans. Literal, like real chattel slavery, bride kidnapping, very, very abusive and sort of nasty ways of hemming them in with linguistic taboos and so on. Yeah, it's complicated, but the point is, we both sort of destroyed these ancient communities, and now we're fighting over the sort of fuzzy boundary between, well, who gets to own, the whole of South Africa, or even the whole of the Cape. And I think really there has to be some line, arbitrary or not, drawn that allows the ethnic minorities of the country to actually survive and have their own territory. And that's the Cape. It's the Western Cape and the Northern Cape, if possibly the Northern Cape. I'll put that as a maybe, depending on how they feel over time. But it'll be the Western Cape, and it has to be that way. And there is cultural commonality to draw from that can build a nation over time. And it has to be that way because there's no other alternative. We're all going to die if we don't get there. And I mean, we're not all going to die, but everything's going to get progressively worse and worse and worse and more horrific over time. And that's not good. You don't trust John Steenhuisen? Well, I don't, but not because I think that he's like some kind of slimy liar, but more that he's just a little bit too soft to really stand on anything. Western Cape will be unstable in the future. Yeah, probably. Nation building is an extremely dangerous and tricky affair. We don't want the DA to be in power. They would lock us down more efficiently. Quite likely. But what's going to happen the first political round after independence? The DA will be sort of everyone is going to want something fresh and new. And I think there's a huge number of people who are not known now, but are fantastic conservative and reactionary and liberal and libertarian thinkers who are clustered around this independence movement, who will emerge full flung into the daylight the second independence actually happens, and they will be the people who will be able to take the limelight, and the DA will become the sort of left wing opposition party. I think that's the way it's going to look if an independent Cape appears. Thanks in the evening. Gonna have a call. Blah blah blah. Okay, that's enough. Someone said skip my question. Let me just make sure that yeah, okay. Unrelated question. B Blutnik one. You're the last question. Nobody else. I have to get. What is the extent? To what extent is the Cape and broader South Africa self-sustainable food-wise? To what extent do they depend on food aid from the US and the West? They don't. We are a net exporter of food, even though we have only 13% of the land is arable. A lot more of the land is grazable, so we can do a lot for cattle and sheep, and pigs and so on. And the land size just itself is absolutely enormous, and we have 50 to 60 million people, depending on estimates. And we are 3 times the size of Germany. Germany has 80 million, so population density is much lower. Even though we have less arable land, we're very, very good at using it, so we're fine that in that regard. And the Western Cape is the biggest food exporter. So positive notes. I think everything can be fine. It's not guaranteed to be fine, but there is definitely a way out of this problem. And I think even Black nationalists will benefit from Cape independence because they can't blame everything on YT anymore. They now have their own political system that they're going to have to create, and it's all going to be up to them. So I think they'll be healthier for it, actually getting what they want, whether it works out or not. So that's me. Cheers. Good night.